you get you closer to the mic?
I think that is the first time in my life where somebody has told me that I was too quiet.
You are getting older, and that sometimes happens.
So, the late, great Dayton's department store in Minneapolis used to have this big Christmas show every year. Not like a play or a dance, more like a museum, where you'd walk down these winding halls and big animatronic puppets would act out scenes from popular Christmas stories. One year it was The Grinch, and one year it was A Christmas Carol, etc. And I'm sure my mom took me to those. My glasses keep falling off from this mask. Hold on, let me twine the earpieces. One year it was A Christmas Carol, etc. And I'm sure my mom took me to those, but I don't really remember anything about them. The one that I do remember was the 2000 production, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Hey, if they can call that a Christmas show, then I can call this a Christmas sermon. I don't think it was technically my first exposure to the existence of the Potter series. I bet the paperback my brother Will had bought at a Scholastic book fair had been lying around the house before that. But this was before the books had been adapted to film. And only 3 years after the release of that first book, and already this whole enterprise was a big enough deal that a department store would spend thousands of dollars to make a rudimentary robot sorting hat. A three-year-old book competing with Dickens and Seuss and Santa Claus for floor space. Maybe I should have known, 8 years old, on the 7th floor of Dayton's department store, that this was the dawn of the Harry Potter generation. There is one book that sold more copies in all of history than Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, not counting, like, the Bible. Can anybody name that book? Does anybody know the best-selling book of all time? Hint, it's another cornerstone of children's fantasy. No, close. It's The Hobbit, actually.
Oh, the Hobbit.
The Hobbit is outside of major religious texts. That's and it doesn't quite mean as much because Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone was published in 1997. The Hobbit was published in 1937. And so it has a few million more copies sold, but it's also been accruing those for 60 more years. At this point, it wasn't just the fact that Harry Potter sold so many books. Growing up in the Harry Potter generation, it was impossible to avoid it. The first 3 novels were read to me in their entirety by my elementary school teachers, to the class. My second grade teacher, Mrs. Verberg, had a big paper Harry riding his broomstick thumbtacked to the classroom wall. The parents of our generation were ecstatic that there was something finally prying our eyes away from Japanese cartoons. There were release parties at every bookstore each time a new book was released. I remember losing at Pin the Scar on Harry at an event for the release of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. And I haven't even gotten to the movies, and that's because, well, the movies were never the point. They weren't there to retell the Harry Potter saga through the medium of cinema. They were there as companions to the novels, expensive illustrations of the events of the book. Walk into any Barnes & Noble, even today, and you'll see the section devoted to Harry Potter is larger than the section devoted to, science or history. And honestly, fair. The Harry Potter books probably sell as many copies as all those science and history books combined. It's impossible to overstate how enormous the Harry Potter books were and are to my entire generation. And we love them. Can probably find plenty of people arguing otherwise, but they're well written. The characters are consistent and colorful, cartoonish enough to be distinct and memorable, complex enough to be nuanced and often tragic. The stories are often convoluted, maybe too convoluted, but still utterly engrossing. Potter is the platonic ideal of the page turner. And the message, the moral, the themes, well, we are at church after all, and it wouldn't be a sermon without a little bit of preaching now, would it? Let's get into it. The main theme of Harry Potter is racism, I think. There's stuff about accepting death and bravery and love in there too, but I think broad strokes, it's a story about racism. The bad guys are the Death Eaters, led by the evil, noseless Lord Voldemort. They want to take over the world so they can kill or imprison the Muggleborns, wizards and witches whose parents do not have magical abilities. In the allegory, the Death Eaters are Nazis or Klansmen, and the Muggleborns are non-whites or Jews. There's even a cute little slur for Muggleborns, Mudblood. It's certainly not a perfect metaphor. Muggleborn status, unlike being Jewish or black, lasts for exactly one generation. A Muggleborn's parents aren't necessarily in an oppressed class, they just don't have magic and are almost completely separated from the goings-on of the world of wizards and witches. A Muggleborn's own child isn't a Muggleborn either. That kid would be a half-blood, the same as Voldemort himself. Racism in the wizarding world is not, as it is in ours, an inherited legacy of pain. It's just bad luck. The racism metaphor is also dulled by some of the book's other bizarre racial politics. Slavery exists in the Harry Potter world in the form of enslaved elves owned by wizard families, but it seems that almost all of the elves just love being slaves, and that abolition would be cruelty. The banks in this world are run by goblins that conform to one too many weird anti-Semitic stereotypes for comfort. And I'm not saying these books turn the Harry Potter generation racist. What I'm saying is that the world we grew up into is a hell of a lot more complicated than the one that we spent so much of our youth enveloped in. In 2021, powerful people are launching an assault on the education of children. Their main goal is to elude the reality of racism in history, to train the young not to recognize the inherited nature of racism's pain. They want to make us think that racism isn't built on history or the construction of our country's fundamental institutions, but on the actions of individual racists, your Klansmen, your Nazis, your Death Eaters. In other words, they want to make racism as simple as it was portrayed in Harry Potter. And of course, the Harry Potter generation grew up, and adults tend to find less comfort in fairy tales than children do. But Potter changed too. You may have noticed that I have thus far avoided saying the name of Harry Potter's author. A few years ago, Joanne Rowling started liking some tweets that seemed to indicate that maybe she opposed full rights for trans people. And at first I thought, may he who has not faved a social media post he didn't fully read cast the first stone. Then Rowling started tweeting some things about how women are being erased by trans-inclusive language in journalism, and I thought, well, this is certainly problematic, but... And then Rowling wrote and published a lengthy essay about how the prominence of the trans movement is a threat to women's rights, and at that point, there were no excuses left to be made. Rowling is the most prominent mouthpiece of a movement I cannot endorse, defend, or apologize for. And honestly, that hits kind of hard. I want to embrace my love of Harry Potter, but Rowling seems insistent on making me feel that enjoying her work is taking the wrong side in a petty culture war. There's new Harry Potter stuff coming out still. Just last week, Warner Brothers dropped a trailer for The Secrets of Dumbledore, part of their Fantastic Beasts prequel movie series. Come back to the magic, the trailer announces in big letters. I wish I could. I really do. But the day before the trailer dropped, Rowling had made another tweet warning us about the dire threat of trans rapists. It feels like marketing at this point. If Rowling's bigotry is in the news, so will the trailer for the new movie. My favorite book in the series is probably the fifth, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry returns to Hogwarts for the first time after Lord Voldemort's physical return. He tries to warn the wizard community of this fact, but the magic government is attempting to suppress the truth of Voldemort's uprising, installing one of its own, Dolores Umbridge, as a teacher at Hogwarts to take over the school and control the curriculum. Order of the Phoenix gets at something the other books don't: the power of the official narrative, the way that truth can be subjugated and controlled, the freedom and love that can be found in resistance. Shortly after Rowling's transphobic essay was published, Daniel Radcliffe, the actor who played Harry in the films and possible contender for the title of Most Handsome Man Alive, came out with a short statement in which he said, "I really hope that you don't entirely lose what was valuable in these stories to you. If these books taught you that love is the strongest force in the universe, capable of overcoming anything, if they taught you that strength is found in diversity, and that dogmatic ideas of pureness lead to the oppression of vulnerable groups, if you found anything in these stories that resonated with you and helped you at any time in your life, then that is between you and the book that you read, and it is sacred." Well said, Mr. Radcliffe. 10 points for Gryffindor. That goes beyond Rowling's choice of advocacies. No matter how much time decays my sense of wonder, no matter how often the expectations set by my favorite kids' books end up failing in a complicated and difficult world, I will choose to find a little bit of magic in my memories, be they at Hogwarts, an auditorium of old Dayton's, or curled up in an armchair, hot cocoa by my side, absorbed in a good book. Now I'd like to open this up for thoughts and discussion.